Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Head Hacking. My name is Carol Auth of the SANS Institute. Jason Blanchard will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speaker is Tim Medin, Certified SANS Instructor. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenter, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Jason.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you very much. And for everyone tuning in right now, thank you so much for tuning in. I really think you're going to enjoy this webcast and what Tim's about to say. I got to hear this as the keynote address at HackFest back in November of 2017. It was amazing. There was parts, like, head hacking, keynote, it's going to be good, because Tim's going to present it, it's going to be good. But I didn't realize I was going to get so much out of it. And there was a few things that I took away that I continue to use each and every day. And so it's made me more productive at work, more productive at home. And I asked Tim, I was like, please give this talk to the webcast. So for all of you tuning in, Tim Medin is an amazing human being. Not only is he funny, but he's incredibly talented and he's incredibly skilled. He's a phenomenal teacher. And this guy wins CTFs like nobody I know. Like, he just goes in and dominates. And so he's going to take that technical ability he has in InfoSec, his ability to run a business and teach, and bring it all together for you today. Tim, thank you so much for joining us.
Cool, Jason. Thanks for having me here. So I hope some of you will make it to the next HackFest. We have tons of fun there, so we'll get back into that a little bit later. But this is the keynote I gave at the HackFest this year, so we'll go through this. It's sort of a story behind it, because I like to have a story for the audience. But this came out of some, basically my real life. So I needed to make some changes in my life. I needed to figure out ways to gain time, and sort of some of the reasons behind some of that is, as I mentioned, I had some big changes coming up in life. So I turned the big 4-0 this year. I tried to say I didn't come up with it didn't have a midlife crisis, but realistically probably did. Just a few months ago, 3 or 4 months now, I started my own company. So I started REDSIEGE Consulting. We do pen testing, stuff like that, and it takes quite a bit of work. So I've got my 8 hours a day that I have to dedicate to clients, plus or minus whatever, and then I've got the additional sort of sales time and business development, and I had to figure out a way to come up with that balance. I've worked from home for years for now, and initially up front I had a lot of problems with working from home and developing some of that balance, but this was a whole new series of challenges. What I really had to do is I had to learn how to do the important stuff and really remove some of those things from my life that were just time wasters, things that were not helping me be better as someone in the security industry, things that were not helping me be a better person, things that were not helping me be a better husband or father, and things that were taking away from all of those things. I had to spend a lot of time focusing on efficiency. And what I ended up doing is I ended up doing quite a bit of reading and listening to podcasts. I love to listen to podcasts in the car, speed it up to about 50% faster to kind of rip through those things while I'm driving around, while I'm traveling, while I'm in the taxi or whatever, to sort of do some time multiplying. Now the sort of thing that I learned from this, one of the biggest problems that I had was I tried to make up time by multitasking. So I would try to do multiple things at the same time to save time. The sort of unfortunate thing is, and from the research, this absolutely works against us. We end up focusing on the unimportant and putting that ahead of the important, right? So, I mean, if you think about what multitasking is, right? I'm spending time, this is my family, spending time with my family, and I get an alert like this. And what I do is I end up taking me away from that time with my family and making me focus on something that is absolutely irrelevant to me. There is nothing less important to me than, some crappy, it's not even a good Pokemon, right? Like that Rattata shows up and that takes me out of the moment. I could be at dinner with my wife, spending time then, or playing with my kids, or talking to a client, or something else, pretty much anything else more interesting, and I get these alerts. And we find that these type of alerts and these interruptions end up taking us out of the moment, and it's actually significantly more damaging than I first understood. When I really have to concentrate these, what I have to turn off, I turn off the music, I close my email, I close Slack, I close all of those things, and it helps me stay laser focused, because that's something that I really have to do. I need to be more efficient, get through some tasks, jump into others, jump back in to email. And we find that people who end up doing a lot of multitasking end up being suckers for irrelevancy. You end up putting these meaningless, these useless tasks ahead of the important thing. In fact, multitasking ends up wasting time. And we see from the research that it's pretty much unanimous that it's an absolute time waster. And this is across the board. There's a few tiny exceptions, but we find also that the people who do the most multitasking are ironically the people who are the worst at multitasking. They end up focusing, they end up looking for things to interrupt what they're currently doing and spend time on some of those things. To see some of the impact of this, if I could get you to do me a favor. So look, grab a pen and grab a piece of paper. I'll give you a few seconds to do that. So find a pen and find a piece of paper. All right, and I actually want you to do this if you're playing along at home, if you would. So grab this pen, grab a piece of paper. I'm stalling while I wait for you to grab this. You're probably at your desk. If you don't have one, I would suggest going back to this later. But what I'd like you to do is I want you to draw two horizontal lines on a piece of paper. Okay, so we have one line that goes maybe all the way across the page and another line right below that. And what I want you to do, and don't do it yet, I'll give you the countdown timer, but what I want you to do is on the first line, I want you to write, I am a great multitasker. After you write the sentence, I am a great multitasker, go to the line below it and write the numbers 1 through 20. Okay? We'll get you started here in a couple seconds. Give me a countdown. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. So start writing and keep track of the time. We're 5 seconds in. 10 seconds. 15 seconds. 20 seconds. 25. All right, so that should go pretty quickly. So you're just writing these one line after another. Okay, now let's do this again. Let's sort of see what this context switching actually ends up doing to you. So do the same thing. So we'll draw those two additional lines, except this time when you start your writing, alternate lines. So you're going to put the I from I am a great multitasker on one line, then write a 1 on the line below it, and you alternate back and forth. And let's see what this does to your time. So let's get ready to go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Five seconds. 10. 15. 20. 25. 30. 35. 40. Okay, so most of you should be done by now. What you find, and you probably found, is it probably took you anywhere from 2 to 4 times longer to or even more to switch back and forth. And this is sort of the real world implementation example of multitasking, right? We're switching back and forth between these ideas. And we find that when we end up doing this a lot, you end up focusing on things that are not important. In fact, doctor at Stanford, Nash, actually uses a fantastic quote. He says, multitaskers can't filter out irrelevancy. Those alerts, they're looking around for, hey, do I have a new notification in Slack? Hey, do I have a new email? Hey, do I have something else go on? hey, by the way, I just heard a sound outside. Let me go look out the window. Hey, look, a squirrel, right? They have trained their body to look for any sort of distraction, anything that might be important to them. And unfortunately, most of those things are absolutely not important. And it ends up making us actually, ironically, worse at multitasking because you're looking for things that distract you and you cannot filter out any of the noise. In fact, it goes so far, some of the research showed that some of the worst multitaskers, they were actually unable to manage a working memory. So they would end up doing some multitasking, work through a whole bunch of challenges at the time, end up doing it slower, and then sort of couldn't remember what they were even working on, which is kind of like a buffer overflow for the brain, if you will. And it ends up being chronically distracted. And to be honest with you, this was exactly where I was. I was a sucker for things that distracted me. I would have Slack open, and I'd be listening to music with some words, and I'd sing along with those words, and an email would come in. At the same time, I'm trying to write code, and I find my brain just doesn't know where to look and doesn't know what to do. So one of the biggest things that causes this is email. And there was some research here according to the BBC, and they said 50% of people, more than 50% of the people will respond to an email immediately as it comes in or as soon as possible, which means whatever task that they're working on, they're going to be interrupted by that email and looking forward to being interrupted. In fact, there was just over 1 in 5 would say they would interrupt a meeting to do so. So having a conversation and listening to someone in the same room, they would intentionally go out of their way to respond to an email. Now, we're probably thinking like, oh, cool. I love those people. They respond quickly to email. Yeah, great. But they're so distracted, maybe they're not going to be quite as thorough with the response. Maybe we're going to have to repeat stuff when we're talking to people. So closed email. I make a point now when I'm talking to others, I will actually step away from my desk. Or if I end up in a meeting and I have my laptop, I'll close the laptop and only open it when I absolutely need it, because I've learned this is something that is a weakness for me. I need to keep that closed so I can focus on the other person and we can have an effective discussion. You're probably thinking like, oh yeah, well, it doesn't really impact me much. Well, here's the research. These email distractions ends up giving us a 10-point drop in IQ. Now, you don't even have to read the email. The simple ding from the email results in this, because that ding comes through and your brain starts processing. Am I expecting an email from so-and-so? What could the email possibly be? Even if you don't check it, that just reminder, that interruption can interrupt you. Now you're thinking like, 10 points, that's not so bad. Well, think of the highest person you know, that's only a 5-point drop in IQ. It's the equivalent of the head fog from missing an entire night's sleep. That's what you're doing when you're constantly being interrupted by email. So I would highly encourage you, close that. See if you can schedule a time to check email. Now there is one particular piece of research that shows that there are some people who are actually okay at multitaskers. In fact, at multitasking. In fact, they have a sort of a fancy term from psychology people. They are called supertaskers. The quote here from Clifford Nash from Stanford, there's some evidence that there's a very, 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 very small group of people who can do 2 tasks at one time. According to one research, the highest statistic I've seen is 1 in 40. So realistically, that's probably not you. And maybe even if it is, there's no evidence that anyone can do 3 tasks at the same time. And you're probably thinking like, oh, well, I'm working on something and checking email. Well, there's some research done. The top 25% of individuals at Stanford. Now, Stanford, respectable school. This is the top 25% of students. They found that those students are doing 4 things at the same time. So they're working on a paper. They've got text messaging open, maybe Facebook in the background and listening to music and maybe doing additional things. Look around. When you're at work, what are you doing? Are you listening to music? Is there background noise? Are you working on one thing and you got email open on the side and Slack open in one window and Twitter someplace else? There is no research that shows that there are people that can handle 3 or more, and we end up losing productivity. some more research about how much slowness this can add to our lives. There was students that were given complicated math problems, not too much unlike from the computing power perspective of what we do in information security. And they would be interrupted with just very simple tasks, and we found a 40% drop in performance. 40%. That's huge. So when we removed these, when they compared this versus the control group, the people were much, much better at these tasks. Part of this, the belief is that when we start getting interrupted, we start getting annoyed, and additional stress hormones are released into our body. Those stress hormones are great if you were multitasking and you needed to fight, but if you have to focus and concentrate, it actually draws blood away from the brain and it makes it more difficult. And unfortunately what that turns into then is it's sort of a vicious cycle. So we end up multitasking so we can get more done. It ironically takes longer to get things done. We feel stressed, so it releases more of the hormones in our body, so we get slower. We feel more compelled to multitask so we can get more done, and we end in this infinite loop, and we actually end up being less productive and getting less done in the time frame allotted. And as I mentioned before, I love this quote, in contrast to almost everything else in your life, the more you multitask, the worse you are at it. Practice in this case works against you. In fact, some of the research related to the people who were good at multitasking, they don't normally multitask. What they're able to do with those super taskers is they are able to figure out what is relevant when they switch tasks and then essentially block everything else out. And again, it only applies to 2 tasks. At 3, we end up all sort of host. Now, what can we do, right? Like, what's the call to action here? We've talked to, yeah, okay, multitasking is bad. I've heard that before, but what are some of the effective things that we can do? First off, turn off those notifications. Now, that doesn't mean just leave your phone and just don't pick up the phone. As I mentioned before, the research shows that even the ding from a text message or an email or whatever sort of ding you get from your phone, that is enough. That is actually equally as distracting as answering the phone and taking the phone call. Just the ding. Your body associates that. You get the sort of Pavlovian response that, hey, I need to do something. Your brain does the context switch, and it actually ends up making you less effective. So turn off those notifications that you don't need. You don't need to know when the Pokemon, especially a crappy one, shows up nearby. Do you need to know when someone likes your thing on Facebook? Check that later. In fact, I got to the point I found that was one of my weaknesses. I last week got around to, I just completely removed Facebook from my phone because it ended up being a distraction and a time waster for me. We'll talk some more about some of the social media and how that impacts us as well. Okay? If you can, set an interval for email. Now, I've got my own company, so I can sort of, I'm beholden to none, but actually sort of beholden to everybody. But I set an interval for email. And I would caution you when you do this, if you can get away with this. Now, some people, you work in the help desk, maybe not able to do so. You're some sort of responder, maybe you're not able to do so. But if you can, set an email set an interval for email. And I would caution you, and this is really hard at first, but don't be glancing over. It's like, can I check it yet? 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 That's going to be very hard. So that's also one of those additional distractors. Set it up. Keep working on your thing. When you get the ding, when you get that alarm, all right, let's rip through email for a little bit. And then we can switch contacts back. Focus on email, crank that email out, and then go back. Another thing that we find, according to some of the research out there, as much time as you give for something is how long it will take. Well, of course that makes sense, right? If you allow an hour for checking your email and an hour for other tasks, guess what? Your email is probably going to take an hour. Try to tighten up that window a little bit. And sometimes things, you don't need a response right away. And there's also other stuff you can do related to writing good email. We'll come back to that a little bit later. Another thing I would encourage you to do is take lists on paper. So I have a good old pen and paper notebook next to me. And according to some of the research out there and people who kind of focus on these tasks, the benefit with paper versus phone or computer is when you open up your phone to take those notes, hey, I need to work on this later, or you open up the app on your computer to, hey, I need to work on this later, you end up getting distracted by it and looking back at some of those lists. Also, try not to necessarily remember it by yourself. Just put it on a piece of paper and forget about it. Come back to it later. If you've got it running around in the back of your head, you're going to end up focusing on it. It's going to take away from your current tasks. Work on focus. So you end up focusing on the things that are important to you and remove those distractors that are wasting your time and preventing you from being more effective. Now, there's some sort of things that you can do in life that are going to help you out here. According to some of the research from the Huffington Post, you know, we all love our coffee in the morning. That cardio, a little bit of workout here, is actually more effective than caffeine. Honestly, in my life, it has too. I turned 40. I wanted to start working out more. I remember after about 3 weeks of working out, I was sitting in my office, and I'm like, you know what? I didn't have my coffee this morning, and I actually don't feel bad about it. I actually feel quite good. I mean, I still drink my coffee because what kind of animal doesn't? But these type of life changes can help quite a bit. Also, sleep. What we end up doing is people, it's oddly American. I do a lot of international travel, but we're sort of, as Americans, we sort of brag about how little sleep we get. And we brag about how much work we do and how much vacation we don't take. And those crazy Europeans get so much vacation. How inefficient are they? Those are good times for replenishment. Get the sleep that you need. And again, this turns into one of those vicious cycles. We end up staying up late to get that extra work done. We see the drop in the IQ points. We cannot focus as well the next day, and we end up having to work longer, again, staying up late. Get a good night's sleep. I've sort of taken the task as I'm sort of unapologetic about getting a good night's sleep. Gets to a certain point, I'm like, I've got to go to sleep. It's not quite done yet. I know it's going to take some more time. I need the sleep so I can come back tomorrow and effectively focus. Because if I'm staying up late, I end up having a difficult time focusing. Schedule your work time. This is one of the big problems when I started working from home, but sort of like reemerged just a little bit differently once I started working for myself. Schedule that work time. So I'm going to start at, 6 in the morning. So I get up, I try to get up at a little after either 5:30 or so. I try to work out and get into my office about 6 o'clock. And then I try to, right when at 5 o'clock, I shut down so I can spend that time with my family, do things with friends. The other thing that's very important, use effective communication. Right? We love email, but unfortunately, too much ends up being an email. And we've talked about some of the problems associated with email. Yeah, it's great for me to send something because I can fire a forget message, but now I'm causing somebody else to be distracted and hurting them. Same thing with text and chat. These are these interrupting the type message. I send a message over to somebody. Maybe they see it 15 seconds later. They read through it. They respond. And now they're interrupting me. We're taking turns interrupting each other and making ourselves less effective at what we do. So help yourself, but also help others. Related to that is write better email. One of my favorite quotes from Blaise Pascal, famous philosopher, I would have written a shorter letter, but I did not have the time. Take the time in your emails to shorten those things up. Let somebody on the other side, don't make them weed through pages and pages of this ridiculously long email to get to the important points. And what I see so often is people say, oh, I want to give them all the information so they can make the best decision possible. Okay, I mean, I sort of see your point, but so much of that junk can just be absolutely filtered down, or we can rearrange the email to make it more effective. Now, one of the sort of famous references here is the 3 sentences website where they talk about email should be 3 sentences. One of my favorites, though, is the military. They use the BLUF model, the bottom line up front, where it looks like something like this. So I might still have the long email, but I can give you a short blurb up front so you can decide how to prioritize, and you don't have to read through the whole thing to figure out exactly what's going on. So for example, it says, here's a quick recap of our conversation plus 2 questions for you at the end. I'd love to receive your responses by Wednesday so that I can keep moving forward on schedule. So it tells me what exactly the contents of the email are, the things that I need to do, whether there's 2 questions I need to respond to, and it gives me a timeline so that it helps me prioritize. I can also maybe in my email client say, hey, let's follow this up on this on Tuesday. You know, don't be a jerk. When it comes to email and meetings, more is not better. And we find so often, it's like, oh, let's invite these guys just in case. I had a boss when I was working back in the bigger corporate world, where if you wanted to invite anybody on our staff to a meeting, you had to provide an agenda, or our staff was free to not show up, and our boss would totally support this. Now that's kind of aggressive, but you know, everybody wants to pull in. At the time I was in IT and security, kind of a crossover role, but everybody wants to pull us in for these meetings just in case they have an IT type question. And if they don't understand what their meeting is, why do they get a lock on our personnel? Because it ends up taking a lot of time and budget money from the IT people. One of my favorite quotes here is, meetings aren't spaghetti, quit throwing people against the wall. Don't just invite people because, oh, you might need them. What you should do is get a smaller group, come up with some recommendations, and then present it to the higher-ups, and it saves everybody time. When you have those meetings, come up with an agenda and stick to the agenda. There's nothing more than I hate is coming to a meeting. It's like, oh, we need to sit here for 2 hours. Well, what are we going to be talking about? Well, kind of this thing. I'm like, that's it for 2 hours? Get this thing nailed down. Figure out the topics. Figure out what things need to be worked through. Yes, there are some things that might rabbit trail a little bit, but come up with an agenda. If you're picking up the meeting, if you're just the one calling the meeting, you should be able to decide what needs to be done during this meeting and provide it to the other people up front so they can come prepared. And they don't have to sit and necessarily think during the meeting or come up with ideas or reach out to other people. They can come prepared to the meeting. So what are some of the other time wasters? Well, one of my favorites here is we've got the myth of the hour. We've got hours, so therefore our meeting must last 1 hour, right? I sort of joke here, but we sort of allotted an hour for this webcast, but sometimes these things are not going to last an hour. Don't necessarily take up an hour. Can you do it in less? Can you do it in a half hour? Can you do it in 25 minutes? Pick your time slot accordingly. One thing that bothers me tremendously is, you know, someone will book an hour of time for a meeting or something, and then at the end, they're like, oh, we're giving you your time back. No, that's not how it's worked. You took too much to begin with. Don't act like a superhero when you don't end up using it. Try to book your time and other people's time to be more efficient for everybody, right? Remove the stupid crap. And by that I mean things like Facebook. On average, we see that people use Facebook 50 minutes per day. And you're probably thinking, well, that's not me. It's like, well, the statistics exist for a reason. There's statistics behind these social media, and we find that people are statistically significantly less happy when they use this. So for example, there was an Israeli company, and they one day said for security concerns, nobody gets Facebook, and they took it away from them. Then they were going to say, okay, after a while, I forget what the exact change was, but they were going to say, okay, some of you can get Facebook back, and it was sort of random. So at that same time, the university said, hey, can we track the changes, the behavior of people? And they found that people that did not go back were 8% happier. So if you think about the math on this, you can save 50 minutes per day and be nearly 10% happier. Sounds like a brilliant thing. We also see that people are 2.7 times more likely to be depressed when they look at Facebook. Your brain can sort of cognitively look at the Facebook status and all the happy things that people are doing and say, oh, well, you know, there's bad stuff going on in their life too. And so cognitively at this high level, your body knows, your brain knows, you know, their life isn't necessarily better than mine, but it's sort of at a more gut level, can't really figure that out, and we end up less happy and more likely to be depressed. So my personal results, I told you I was going to take you through my story. It's been absolutely fantastic. I end up with a drastically, I'm unable to tolerate some of these additional time wasters. If something like I have an app, and I'm like, okay, this thing is a waste of my time, it's alerting me too much, it's gone. I'm more able to quickly filter out things that are working against me, taking up the important time, taking things that are away from things that are important to me, like my focused work, cranking through. I'm doing a pen test, and I'm focusing on a hard problem. Those distractions will take me out of that context, and I'll have to come, sort of takes me a few minutes to switch back into that context and get stuff done, whereas when I can remove these distractions, I can slam through some of this. It allows me to just nail through a bunch of email. I'll queue it all up and just slam through it one after another. Makes me more efficient at my email as well. And it also, and this is ultimately the thing that's most important, it allows me to focus on the things that are, enjoyable, right? Like I mentioned, my wife and kids. I'm not getting these distractions to let me know that tomorrow is 2-star day at Starbucks, or somebody is playing a game with me, and it's now my turn in chess. This is one of the interesting things that I heard in one of the podcasts. It said, no one will ever remember that book that you didn't write, but they will remember that you didn't answer an email. And if you think through that, you're like, wow, how messed up is that, right? We're focusing, and we put focus on other people on these, significantly less important things over these big things, because the big things are intangibles, right? That book that never happens, well, it doesn't impact me because, well, it frankly didn't happen. So call to action here is focus on the important. And what can you do with the extra time? Well, hopefully you can, write some cool blog posts, play with some cool new tools, right? Don't be afraid to fail. So much of, especially pen testing, is failing. We try these things, they don't work, we move on to the next, and maybe it does work. Help others, right? There are so many times that I've learned a tremendous amount in teaching. In fact, even in 660 advanced pen testing course, there are so many things that I learned from the new people in my classes, and share that information. So I've seen things like, for example, in Dallas, it's based on sort of the Austin model. But in Austin, they have the hackers, it's Austin Hackers Anonymous. Dallas has Dallas Hackers Association. There's some others where to go to those events, you're supposed to contribute. And that just means like a 5-minute, 10-minute presentation. It doesn't have to be formal. You don't have to have a slide deck. Just walk in and say, here's the things that I'm working on. Because I can guarantee you there are experiences that you have that nobody else has. Problems that you worked through that other people haven't worked through or are stuck on. And even if it's a tiny little issue, I can guarantee you it will help somebody. And I would encourage you, to make your life more efficient, focus on those things that are important, and then use that additional time to contribute back, both to the InfoSec community and just humanity in general. So with that, I want to thank you guys so much for attending. If you're interested, here are some of the courses I've got coming up. So we got a couple of 660s, some pen testing in Japan, which is awesome if you haven't been there, some hands-on pen testing. And then if you have questions about this, feel free to drop me an email, tim@redsiege.com, Twitter handle's in the corner. Hit me up with questions. I love responding to people. And again, you're not going to get that instantaneous response unless you just happen to time it just right. But I like hearing from people and responding back to people. So don't hesitate to reach out if you do indeed have some questions. With that, I'll hand it over to Jason.
Tim, I really thank you for doing this. One of the things that I enjoyed while listening to you was seeing how many people were inattentive during the webcast. And I think this is a really good format for doing this talk because I think a lot of people got an opportunity to see how much they were multitasking while listening to you. And so I'm not saying it was everybody, but I could definitely see the amount of people that did. So, Tim, for the people who had the inability to stop multitasking while listening to your webcast today, what would you say they should do first to get out of this vicious cycle that they're in?
Well, I think, and part of the problem is, and I fully admit it, you guys are probably at work and you're trying to get work done, and they're like, oh, this sounds interesting, let's do that at the same time, right? So we sort of you're sort of stuck in this position. But I would, my big thing that helped me the most was defining time for specific tasks. So I'm going to focus on this next thing for the next hour and a half, and then I'll jump back to email. Splitting that time up, using some of the distractors, was by far the most useful for me in the work world. In my sort of private life, it was those notifications. On my phone, I get alerts for text messages, and then I get badges for email for my business account, and that's it. Nobody else is allowed to interrupt me because, frankly, it's not as important as the time with my friends and family.
So one person said, "Hey Tim, this is some really good facts, but it isn't going to be easy to implement." For the people who are thinking right now this isn't going to be easy to implement, is there a way that you can encourage them to continue to go, or is this something that you learned over time, or
Sure.
Did you fumble through this process?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. When I first started turning the notifications off on my phone, I was like addicted to that. Like it felt good to be wanted or alerted by, honestly, stupid stuff. And most of those alerts, the vast majority, are completely unimportant, things that can be filtered out, right? Like I don't need to, when I'm playing with my kids, to get a ding when someone likes a post that I did 4 days ago. That is completely unimportant. Filter out some of those notifications. Now at work, it might be a little bit more difficult, where someone sort of expects that you respond in a given time frame. And that is absolutely more difficult. So if you can, talk to your boss and be like, look, I'm trying to focus. I want to be more effective. Can you give me, like, at the top of the hour, I'll check email and respond to email at the top of the hour. Give me, 55 minutes of focused work on other things. And again, you might not be able to, but you can focus on those things for you first, right? Those alerts from your phone that are interrupting you. And also, you can help other people by the way you respond and you write email. Don't, invite 1,000 people to your email chain and reply all. Don't invite half the company to your meeting because you think it's going to make you more effective.
Tim, one of the things that when I first listened to this back in November, I am a chronic multitasker. While trying to do this webcast, I was checking my phone. Email were coming through, and I was like, darn it, again. And so I closed the email and I turned off my phone just to help be a part of this webcast. I remember the 2-line thing. How long did it take you to realize that, if you put something on one line, the next line, the back and forth? For most people, I'm guessing they didn't even do it, but if they did take that time to write one thing on the next, that's the thing that I went back to the most. How, like, when you start multitasking again, are you able to pull yourself out of it, or can you?
No, that honestly, I still get stuck with it. Like it happened this morning. So today's a snow day. So I've got the kids at home. My wife is out of town, so I've got the kids in the background, and I want to go play outside, and I'm trying to catch up email from a longer weekend. And it took me a little while to sort of flip my head back into that. But then I ended up having to respond to a bunch of emails, and I had to focus on some of that, like, bottom line up front. Okay, so I'm distracted. Let me help somebody else by, focusing on my email to help them more quickly process some of that.
Bill said, and I think he just makes a good point. I agree. I can't multitask on things that take the same brain focus, but I can walk and talk. I can listen to this talk and eat my lunch. If someone really wants to multitask, can we encourage those types of combinations? So things that can multitask together that aren't necessarily fighting for the same brain space, I guess is what Bill said.
Yeah, and I mentioned that earlier because I was, doing other things, like I was walking through an airport and listening to podcasts. And in those instances, they're not competing for the same functionality in your brain. And I haven't found research one way or the other for it. But all the research I have found, when you have contention for, like, mental processing, like, for example, the math, when he's working when the Stanford students were working really hard on the math and they were asked to do some other really simple tasks and it switched their context. That's absolutely, as you said, very different from walking through an airport while I listen to something else in the background. Now, again, I don't know the research on that, but I very much do that, and I don't know if since there is no research, I definitely do it, and kind of would encourage you to, listen to those podcasts or whatever to help you, learn more.
And then, Tim, do you have any useful books or like a talk or those podcasts that you listen to that you can recommend for others here?
Yeah, so throughout the presentation, there was a bunch of links in the bottom corner. Those take me to point to various articles. The NPR one, I believe that was originally, it was a podcast from, it was either Hidden Brain or, let me flip back, which one was that? I don't remember off the top of my head, but the links in the bottom talk about, have links to the information where I got some of this. Hidden Brain, or I don't remember the exact podcast off the top of my head. Why am I blanking on this? Maybe it was Radio Lab. I forget.
If you get a chance, you can always update the slide and then give it to Carol, and then she can upload it for you.
Sure. Yeah.
One last. Well, maybe we have time for a few more, but since the audience is in IT security, how can the things that you're talking about improve security in most organizations?
I think I don't know if it's directly related to security. It just gives you that more focused time. So when you are working on something, you can more directly focus on it. And when you're working on something else, you can more easily focus on that. And to be honest, it's just the Facebook stuff, right? I get, according to the stat, if I'm an average person, I get 50 minutes per day back. And you end up being anywhere from 5% to 8% plus or minus, right? Happier. So those things are better. You when you walk into work, you had a more fulfilling day outside because you spent it distraction-free with your friends and family.
So getting a lot of great questions here. One is from Vincent. He's like, so let's say you give yourself 30 minutes to do a task, but it starts taking longer than you set aside for. Like, how do you adjust for things that take longer than you expected them to?
Oh, that's the that's the $1 million question. I was hoping nobody asked something like that. In that case, I mean, there's tasks that just, right, they have to get done, and we have to spend more time on it. But there are others, like for example, if I dedicated every morning to, a half an hour to check email, it's probably going to take that full half hour. Now, when it comes to, like, maybe I'm writing code, it's going to take as long as it takes. There's no necessarily sort of acceleration path, if you will, for something that's really down and in depth. But some of these lighter tasks, it's really easy to get distracted and end up sucking some of the time away. So I sort of don't have a good answer for you other than just, do what you got to do.
And then, Tim, we'll end with this last. Well, one point was Talk of the Nation was the podcast that you had mentioned. So, Talk of the Nation.
Yeah, but it was. Okay, sure. I think it was part of an NPR or a This American Life, where they actually ended up referencing the other podcast. Because I don't have Talk of the Nation in my podcast queue, so I heard it someplace else, and I don't remember which. I know that doesn't help.
The one thing I also took away was that if you give something an hour, it will take an hour. And so we gave this webcast an hour, and we could talk for another 17 minutes, but I think we're going to say goodbye, and we're going to not give people their 17 minutes back, but we're going to give people an opportunity to So, Tim, any final words?
No, I just want to thank you guys so much for attending. And again, feel free, if you have questions, I'd be more than happy to respond to that.
Thank you, and I'll turn it back over to Carol for you to finish this up.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Tim, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.